one of the things I do want to say is that as someone who's part of an organization that evaluates conventions and offers them consultation services, PAX audiences are the best. So well done, everybody. Thank you for treating that with dignity.
You handled it perfectly. You were fantastic yourself. You handled it perfectly.
Well, thank you.
All right, a little applause for Dr. B and his forces.
All right, so let's get to some fun stuff. And I just realized that given how I refer to a lot of the Aspie kids that I work with as my little datas, that's a real miss on my part.
And also, I am representing Spock today.
Oh, you going Vulcan?
Do you not see my code? What up?
Oh, snap! Oh my God!
Someone recognized it, right?
Oh my God, that's amazing. So we have several people who are open about the fact that they're on the spectrum. We've got several clinical experts, and we've got people who represent autism in media. But you know, what do various media portrayals get wrong? Anybody can throw this one out there.
Would you like an alphabetical list? Or
of course it is.
I can do either.
Go ahead.
No, I'm teasing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nick, I could, but I've been taught to pause in conversation and let other people talk. Nobody, come on, that's funny.
It's funny because it's true. Here's the thing that I see as the biggest problem. A lot of times, whether it's comics or movies or video games, they do something I call the checked boxed tendency, where they look at diagnostic criterion and then they say, all right, let me see what makes up someone who's autistic. And they say, okay, sensory processing, so we'll go ahead and make them have trouble with light, sound, olfactory, smelling and taste, tactile. Okay, they have no back and forth of theory of mind, the ability to take on someone else's perspective, so they'll have 0 of that. Okay, no, struggling with facial expressions, so no eye contact, never looks, doesn't know how to smile, doesn't understand, and they're just checking boxes. And there's a reality for any condition and awareness at the beginning in media. You do gotta kind of exaggerate it so people know what it is, because they're not going to know how to look for subtleties. But I think we're at the point where we can move into that, to subtleties. We can sort of escape this checkbox tendency. Some people are doing it, some aren't, and we'll probably talk more in depth about that, but the checkbox tendency to me is the biggest problem.
Yeah, one of the big things is I know some of the producers that do these shows and the people that they hire to do some of these shows. And I can tell you for very big certainty, they go for impact factor. They do not go for accuracy on any level. They want something that's going to sell, something that's going to cause ruckus, and something, even if it's bad media, it's still media for them. And so just going off of that, they are looking for things that are going to portray something that's going to make some noise in somewhere.
Yeah, like to portray a spectrum like autism, you'd have to basically like fill a show with autistics and like every flavor of the rainbow. And I mean that's not why they make shows with autistic characters. They make it to demonstrate like the aloneness and the difference. You have to surround that character with a bunch of normies, and like it's like a catch-22. You can't do it. And I will play the devil's advocate and say, because it's such a big spectrum, every portrayal of autism is probably an accurate summary.
Well, that brings an interesting factor into things, is the fact that, you all saw that list. You all saw the diagnostic criteria and how small the font was. That was actually 2 pages worth of text in regular font. And
in the DSM, tell them what they don't see. That are the 16 pages that go after it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the differential diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, where the all the things that this could look like, or some of the things that that have overlap. One of the big ones in the DSM-5 that kind of annoys me a little bit in dealing with other practitioners sometimes is the fact that often you actually see you expect to see processing difficulties in autism spectrum disorders, to the point that generally you're not supposed to diagnose ADHD separately, unless there are really mitigating circumstances. Ryan, you were...
Oh, well, I don't want to be... Oh, I don't want to be like a wet sock here.
Be a sock with a log in it. Just do that.
I think there is a reality. I think it's, we have standardized ways of assessment and normed ways of understanding what things are. And as much as it is annoying to see that massive list of criteria, it's important so that we can distinguish between what is autistic and what is social communication pragmatic disorder and what is ADHD, what's anxiety, what are all these things that do commonly exist together. And it can get murky because if we don't, then we don't know the accurate intervention. If I got a kiddo with ADHD who's having social skill deficits because he's incredibly impulsive, doesn't think about what he's doing, but he actually does know what to do, he just doesn't think about it. The intervention is going to be very different. I'm not going to focus with that kid on eye contact, back and forth conversation. I'm going to focus with them on how to stop impulses, how to create mental filters, and so it's important. I think, ADHD and you can be Aspie and have great executive functioning. That exists. That's not a criterion.
I know one. She's magic, and we love her.
like she can think in a straight line?
She can. So she gets us all together and organizes us, and we're like, la, 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 and she's like,
So
she's a unicorn.
I'll introduce her.
Well,
oh my God.
I wouldn't say unicorn because I have a ton of Aspies that when we're measuring their working memory or their processing speed, they do phenomenal. They're brilliant. Now there are types of processing that they do struggle with. Sensory processing, absolutely, that slows things down. Absolutely, but ADHD, we will have processing deficits because it's not actually because they lack the areas of the brain that allow them to process, it's because processing requires a lot of attention. So if I'm not paying attention and you're doing a processing test with me, I'll score an 80. That's not accurate, but I have trouble paying attention. So, just the point is ADHD does often go with Asperger's, but you absolutely can have them separate. I think 65% of the time with Asperger's, there's what we call a comorbid condition, meaning they're existing independently at the same time, right? As opposed to associative, meaning that they kind of cause each other. So 65% of the time, the most common being anxiety, ADHD, and tic disorders. And then of course, mood dysregulation gets there.
I have a question for all you doctors.
Sure.
Does the diagnostic criteria differ for men and women?
That's a
tough question.
That's a great question. So when we look at assessment, right? So diagnostic criterion is the same, but diagnostics are different. So when we're looking at something like social reciprocity, right? But being able to do back and forth conversation, again, theory of mind. Females in general have a leg up neurologically. They got about 17% more volume in the anterior temporal lobes, so they're able to communicate. This probably sounds really boring, I'm sorry. I love the brain.
That means bigger brain, right? Like we've got bigger brains, that's what I heard.
So we see more networking, more abilities there. So oftentimes what you get with female Aspies is people will be like, oh yeah, they're just one of the guys. It's like our cool, dorky female friend, and then they assume it's fine, but
or they're super shy,
sure.
Yeah, they're really introverted, or bipolar, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Or, something like that.
But the reality is there's still a female in our culture, and as much as we'd be like, oh yeah, she's one of the guys, she's like super chill and dorky and like kind of awkward, the reality is there are expectations for her that aren't there for guys. So even though maybe if this individual was a male, it wouldn't be as impactful, for them it absolutely is. So when we're looking at assessment, we do keep that in mind. But it is, to be fair, it's not done very well. Like not every clinician does what they should be doing.
It's a big thing that we see when we do an entire assessment. We are doing not just one test, we're probably doing about 8 to 9 just for this category. And to differentiate between anxiety, between depression, between social pragmatic, between a whole bunch of other lists of diagnoses, because it could not be that, it could be something else. And any diagnostician worth their salt, and I'm not talking necessarily about the ones that are forced by school systems, I will let you know that they unfortunately don't get as much training as they should, since they are interacting with them almost on a daily basis, that they are going to give a whole multitude of tests to incorporate a lot of different data to really hone in on what's going on. Because someone on, let's say, the the waist could have really poor processing speed in that area and working memory, but then you give them a processing speed test from the DCAFs, and they do phenomenal on that. And we're looking at like, what's the difference here? And you have to know the inner workings to the waist, or another one of the IQ tests, to know that there's a different cognitive loading on that. Whereas their processing speeds have a big mixing of working memory on it as well. And so the true deficit is in that area, which is causing a processing speed when you have that combined together.
So it's complicated.
Yeah.
Well, and this is, you know, I mean, it's an incredibly important question because there are a lot of criteria that are based on, you know, outward observation of guys. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the diagnosis rate for women, for girls and women, have gone up to what, 1 in 168?
Something like that. It's increasing.
For just general prevalence of females who
Yeah.
have autism,
Yeah.
it probably is around there. Right now, it's 1 in 10 of people diagnosed as ASPE are female, which is inaccurate.
Yeah.
That's an assessment problem.
So yeah, no, there's
Probably
problems
168 if it was accurate.
which is interesting because, man, I got two up there. Yeah, no,
Oh, sure.
Tempe Brennan and Symmetra.
I actually have a question about Tempe. Did they ever diagnose her as autistic in the show?
Not in the show. It was always Emily Deschanel and some of the show writers were very public in the questions and answers that they wanted to portray her with autism.
Okay. Another interesting idea here is when you get feedback around like The Good Doctor, right? Like he's autistic from the very beginning, and it's like a big part of the show. And there's all these criticisms around what they miss, and then you get these characters like Newt, you know, and like instead of criticizing what they missed with that, like he doesn't technically have the diagnosis. They talk more about like all of the things about him that are great that make him sort of autistic.
Well, and you know, just speaking from a personal perspective, that's what I like to see in media, that this is just a dear friend of mine, and I want to give credit where it's due. My friend Jessica runs a great YouTube channel called How to ADHD. She's not a clinician, but she does really well-informed stuff. And when she speaks about autism and ADHD, she likes to talk about it this way. Your brain's running a Mac. Why are you trying to make it a PC?
I have a patch for my dog that says something like, it's not a different, it's a different operating system.
Yeah, it's a different OS. It's the same idea, and I really like seeing media portrayals where they're not going for that sort of impact factor, and it's just a factor in the character. Yeah. And actually, one of the reasons I put Temperance Brennan up here, Bones, is because of how compassionately a lot of her friends treated her. That when she got overly honest, they were like, no, you get used to that. She's just being Bones. And it was just a thing, and they went with that.
And they didn't let her get away with some of the more damaging characteristics either.
No, they treated her with the kind of consequences that you'd expect. But one of the things I'm really curious about, because Dr. Kelly wrote the first autistic superhero. How'd you go about doing that?
You know, it's interesting. We wanted to create a social skills group based around an empowering character. Frank Gaskell and I, who worked on it with me. And we actually were just going to start off with this book that would help lead a social skills group. And so we got a bunch, and we wanted it to be made by ASPE. So we got a huge panel of kiddos, with probably 60 of them in all. And we talk everything from, you know, what do you want the sister's name to be? What does he look like? What's his name? It's actually interesting because like 3 or 4 of them all were like, we wanted him to be named Damien. They're like, oof, we're gonna go with Max on that. I was like, ooh. And they also, like 12 of them wanted him to wear a black biker jacket. It's like, because that's just really cool. But we had to deviate from that a little bit. But so, you know, we wanted it to be made by them, and we wanted it to be a story that they engaged with and they felt they could relate to, and we wanted it to be empowering. And we did everything down to, I drew, you know, 8 different types of animation, ranging from popsicle sticks of Possible Max, ranging from retro style like Jetsons, Flintstones, right, very simple, to anime, you know, kind of more complex and variants of anime. And I talked about feet, eyes, everything, anime across the board. And you know, the reason, so it kind of looks more like a manga actually, but you know, it's wonderful. And the reason I love anime is It's so easy. If they get mad, the background turns red. They get a teardrop on their face. There's no subtlety. You know exactly what to do. And everything is narrated. Oh, I can't believe you said that to me. We're having tension. Like, you're like, oh, this is great. I know exactly what everybody's thinking, what they're feeling. This is so easy. I can turn my brain off and I know exactly what's happening. So it's a wonderful thing. But it's interesting you say that because it was getting a lot of traction. Siblings started to want it, right? And we had reached out to some publishers, like, we want this. But they said, we don't want it to be, like, very forward about Aspie and make it more subtle. Like, we don't want it to be like an identity thing because that's too niche. And
so basically, don't go full Rain Man.
No, more of just he can be Aspie, but don't say it. Is basically the same, right? It's like he can have tendencies, but don't make this about a guy with Asperger's. And we were like, absolutely not. What are you talking about? That's the point.
Let's look at this bush, but not call it a bush.
Yeah, we're like, absolutely
if you've met
not.
somebody on the spectrum who's out about the spectrum, talk about it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it hit. We got a lot of local coverage, and we did get a great publisher who was willing to keep it, but it took a while. We had some pushback. We got some national coverage. About 3 years later, David Cott came out with At Face Value. It's another comic book about an autistic kiddo. And, at that point, I think it was, and we have been seeing it getting increasingly open, we were at a better place. And now with Max Gamer 2 coming out that we're doing, we are getting a whole lot more traction on what people are willing to let us put out there. So, yeah.
Can I ask, so you've identified as a clinician, and you're using lots of really fancy words, which I've been seeing confused looks about, so you guys should, watch that. And so what I'm wondering is, sorry. What I'm wondering is, how did you go about making, can you talk a little bit about how you made Max the character, not that list we saw earlier, but more of a human?
So like how we portray him?
Yeah,
or...
like you could very easily, I'm a writer, so I could very easily create a character that just ticked all those boxes.
Sure.
But that's not technically
right.
a human, right? How did you humanize him?
Yeah, so we, of course, Frank is also an Aspie specialist, and we sort of have this average idea of an Aspie in our head from just seeing hundreds and hundreds of kiddos.
Yeah, you've got a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, so that's one thing we kind of went on, but it was also, with the 60 or so Aspies that we sort of paneled, we're like, what do you want to see, right? I mean, what is the thing you want to see? So, things like most of them agreed, show a birthday party scene where parents thought they were helping out and send them a birthday to make friends, and it's too loud and noisy, and they cry, and then they're embarrassed. And it's one that almost, if I were to put a percentage, 80% of Aspies go through, and it's just borderline traumatizing, if not traumatizing. So having them
think
help,
about that till right now. Now I'm going through all the birthdays in my head from when I was a child.
Right.
Thanks, man.
Right. So yeah.
Like this?
And parents don't know, right? So a lot of it, and so we really wanted to be driven by them. And there's a lot of other stuff. He has a sibling, Sarah, who's very neurotypical. In fact, she's exceptional socially. She doesn't get a brother. She's frustrated. She doesn't get why he has to have his chicken nuggets and french fries all the time and peanut butter jelly sandwich and cut up into certain shapes and shirt tags. She thinks it's stupid having to take the doctor. She's frustrated by it. Siblings, it is tough to be a sibling sometimes, for good and bad. Sometimes even when patient, it is tough. If you've got a sibling who's having meltdowns and the whole family has to kind of come and help this kid, it's not the kid's fault. But if you can imagine being a sibling, yeah, you're not getting attention, and you just can't. There's not a bandwidth, your parents, so that can be tough. And then the parents, again, wanting to be helpful, but kind of doing all the wrong stuff because they're trying to help a neurotypical kid.
One of the things I really like about that is the fact that you have just years, decades, I don't know, lots of experience with this community, and at the same time, you asked that community what they would like to see, and that's the thing that I think is missing from a lot of these media portrayals, right? And I just get super skeptical when I see things like this, and they present it as the autistic experience. And I'll go looking to see if they did any kind of research or consultation, and it's just like the #1 complaint from people in this community is, if you're going to do something for us, involve us at the very least.
Seems simple, right?
You would think that.
I think it would, but it's not.
Stories.
It's old.
I should thank you for doing that.
Oh, absolutely.
Why ask an autistic person when we can go to an expert?
I had somebody come to me once, and they were like, okay, okay, so we really want to talk to this person, but they're autistic, but you're only a little autistic, so can you like translate for us?
Oh my
And I
God.
was like,
What in the world?
and they were like, was that rude? And I was like,
You're like, who's
because
asking?
in my head I'm running through like all of the appropriate responses
Oh my
that I've
God.
learned, and like I just don't want to use any of them. And so like it came out like a, yeah.
Well, part of me's
Amazing.
thinking, was that rude? Really? You're asking the autistic person if that's rude? Come on, you're the one who's supposed to know this.
That's my favorite. I like I see somebody else being rude to me, like they're being rude. Why can't I be? Why?
Right, that's not fair.
My husband is
Chicken nuggets and fries all over again.
So this is not one of the questions I prepared you all for, but I've got
You
it.
can't do this to me, no.
I'm sorry, but you might like this one. Who's your favorite autistic character in media?
Shauna, do you have it primed and ready to go?
Me?
Yeah. You? Oh my God.
I'm funny, yeah. No, so that's a really difficult question because a lot of the people that I identify with, because that's the thing, right? Like,
Right.
You're basically asking
Who do you
identify with.
gel with? Yeah.
And like, most of them aren't diagnosed as autistic, and so that becomes really difficult, and it's also like, none of them are a perfect fit, so I identify with different strengths and opportunities and stuff, and I don't think I like any of them especially a lot, and I can get into a lot of the science, why you might be thinking like, well, she says she's representing Spock. Well, Spock had a lot of cultural things that we can't officially decide whether he's like a good sort of like explanation, and if you say Spock doesn't have emotions, we will have a doc afterward. And then like, well, what about Sherlock Holmes? And every portrayal of Sherlock Holmes has that kind of tendency, and you're like, okay, well, if you think about that, he did a lot of drugs. And like, yeah, some of us do a lot of drugs, but like different drugs, right? So you have like all of these problems, like Newt's in Harry Potter, and I would love to live in Harry Potter, but not because they're nice to ask people, just because magic, dude.
Is that the quote? Is that the quote of the night?
Oh yeah, no, I
Because
think
magic
that's
dude
the
shot up
that's really the
Stain.
takeaway from this. I would love to
Yeah.
I would love to live in Harry Potter world because magic, dude.
Well, and then not because they're nice to Ashley's, but because magic, dude. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Right?
I'm in a wheelchair, man. If I could levitate shit, I would just float everywhere.
Priorities.
Right on.
Open
Priorities.
doors, like, humans have to open doors for me. The next time you walk through a door, wait 5 minutes.
Love it.
Oh my god, yes. That's awesome.
I walk through 52 doors a day on average.
Holy crap.
Do you want us to go?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, follow that up. Follow that up. I
yeah,
dare you.
Yeah, here we go. I mean, I could say Max Gamer. I think I want to say Shauna. I think, and I would actually want your thoughts on this too. I think anime does a phenomenal job at creating Aspie characters. They don't call them Aspie, but ones that popped in my mind, Sai from Naruto. Oh, I love Sai. I mean, it's so beautiful. L from Death Note. L, my God, if that is not a high functioning Aspie. And so I think anime does a very, very good job. Gosh, that is such a hard question.
Right?
I'll say this one thing. Does anybody play Warframe? Okay, I gotta tell you, my new, see that, a lot of enthusiasm, I like it.
Enthusiastic hand raises.
I
I think
love
he's
that.
about to jump up on stage.
Right, yeah, I was gonna say. So I really love the new development with Rel, right, from Chain of Heroes. You know what I'm talking about? My man. All right. So, like, looking at having cards to show how he feels. I love that video games are starting to do it because they've been really slow to it. Kaplan from Blizzard, of course, with Symmetra was good. And then Rel is great. But really, aside from that, we're kind of run dry. Even comics.
Most of the other autistic video game characters are insane in some other way.
Yeah.
That's a whole different panel.
Do you agree with me on the anime point, Emily?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I just finished watching My Hero Academia.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Fantastic. And very, very easily, I think that May in that one is super, super on the spectrum in a very, very beautiful way.
All right, you got it.
Yeah, see, all right.
May
No, we got some love for May there.
Oh yeah, no, she's fantastic, but she's driven, but she doesn't understand the social. She used, I don't want to spoil this. Everyone seen season 2?
Oh, I heard a no.
All right.
No, keep it away.
I've never watched it, and I demand you not spoil it.
Yeah,
we won't.
Anyways, the way that she portrays herself and the way that she interacts with the other heroes is just super amazing. And just very, very telling of everything that she does, especially towards the end of season 3. But she's also doing it in such a very helpful manner. She's using it as a power for good, which I think is one of the more important parts of it.
Yep.
You mentioned anime, like you can background turns red and stuff. I have a hot tip for you autistics out there. If you use like Apple TV or whatever, and you turn on a feature called audio descriptions, technically it's for blind people because they can't see the screen, but they describe emotions.
What?
There you go.
So I watched all of Atypical again with the audio descriptions on, and I finally realized why his mom did anything.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a bit of a bias. I have a hard time watching any diagnosis-based television because if they do it wrong, I'm angry. If they do it right, it's like I never left work. And I'm not getting paid. So
I do it in defense because people are like, oh, you're autistic, have you seen Pyramid?
Oh, God.
Oh, you're autistic, have you seen Atypical? Are you autistic like Rain Man? And I'm like, I'm standing right here.
Yeah, no, I love that one. I'm like, you don't look autistic. I'll tell you what, homie. Drop some toothpicks. I will count them. I will get it wrong.
There's this woman, and I'm forgetting her name, but she made a video about like all of the dumb questions people ask you for autistic, and that was one of the ones she did.
Was this the British woman?
No, she's an American accent, but it's like, do you want a hug? Can they fix it? If you just take the right medications, don't eat gluten and that'll make it better. And like she goes through all of them, and it's just like a progressive, like, yes, and I hate this.
I like that you mentioned that neurotypical folk tend to try to tell Aspies, you all, how you should frame it and how important it is to you.
Have you tried?
Right. It's one of a good scene from Atypical is that he wants to write a paper on the most important thing in his life, right? And to him, it's like, this is kind of 13. I saw boobs once. Like, that's what he says. He's like, I want to write about that. That was the most important thing in my life at this point. And his teacher's like, why don't you write about autism? Like, the things you've overcome, the diversity. His response was really cool. He's like, no, that's stupid. What would you write a paper about having 10 fingers and 10 toes? That's nothing. No, I'm gonna write about boobs. But that is the thing, Shauna, you're right. I mean, it is like, we tend to be like, oh my gosh, you should like make this your primary identity. And if you want to, that's okay. But oh gosh, you should be like, oh, I'm Aspie, or oh, I'm autistic, and really embrace it. And that's what you should do. And this is your primary identity. It's like,
I'm not your monkey.
Right, it's like, come on, guys.
I will not dance for you.
One time when I was asked that, I very seriously asked back, like, do you need this for like research? Like, am I helping? You understand this? But shouldn't you know this?
Google's the thing. Okay, I'm gonna give another curveball question to y'all. Sorry.
I like the curveballs.
We like curveballs.
But I bet you have an opinion on this.
You owe me a milkshake.
By the way,
You owe me a milkshake.
Done.
I will tell
For
you
this
all,
one, for the reaction I think I'm gonna get, absolutely. So, Big Bang Theory.
Moving on.
All right, I have people that are offended by Big Bang Theory on my behalf. I have people who won't watch it. They like draw me into conversations and they're like, it's the worst, right? And I'm like, I think it's funny. And their minds explode. Like, it's not an accurate representation. I did used to knock on stuff 3 times. Like, some of his stuff is like, they do manage to add some humor to it. His social convention thing, where like, he's like, but why do you have to do this? What? Okay. So, raise your hand if you know that you're not supposed to tell your boss's boss no in a meeting.
What
Think about
happens
it, right?
if we
It's
are the
pretty typical.
boss?
Wait, what?
You have a boss, they have a boss who's a little fancier than your boss, right? You're in a meeting and he goes, you do blah, 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 and you're like, no. you're laughing. You shouldn't do that. I do that all the time. So I had somebody take me aside once, and they were like, you cannot do that. And at this point, I've learned a little bit. So I was like, okay, I understand that you think I can't do that, and I can give you like 80 reasons why I'm not going to say yes. But I understand this is probably one of those social convention things, and her face lit up because she realized she wasn't going to have to argue with me about this, and she went, yes, it's a social convention. It's like a magic. And I said, okay, here's the thing. If it's a social convention, what else do I say? And so she gave me a bunch of examples, and that's the new thing I run through my head.
God, yes.
But there's another funnier part of the story. So one time I was in a meeting, and I wasn't super paying attention, and the phrase that I had started using was, let's talk about this offline. And I said that, there's this dead silence. Awkward silences, am I right? That's the time when you're like, nope. Don't know what I did, but that was bad.
Oh no, that is the first circle of hell.
And this guy's looking at me from all the way at the other end of the table because I said as far away from me as I can. And he goes, "Did you just tell me that?" 13. F word.
Nice stuff.
Did you just tell me to, F off? And I was like, in my head, I was frantically like, did I? No, no, and then they all started laughing, which is another fun part of this whole experience. And so I'm looking at my boss, and I was like, what did I do? And he's like, no, it's cool. Later he explained to me that the tone sounded like I was saying F off. So now I have to come up with a new phrase.
What about some of your clients? I mean, the Big Bang Theory is a hot button issue. I actually take the really opposite perspective. I can't watch The Big Bang Theory because I've been in those situations where I've had somebody being like, and what do we say? And what do we not say?
I get real sarcastic when that happens.
I do now, but when I'm younger and I'm trusting of everybody, and like, what do you say? What do you? And we're, in my mind, we're not laughing with, Sheldon. We're laughing at him, and like, I've been there.
Well, there's something you're saying that I think is really important. This idea of, if you look at the new, the new one is basically autism level 1, 2, or 3 now. Yeah. And level 1 is basically Asperger's. But if you look at all of them, there's a requirement, is that you require support. There's varying levels of degree of support needed from 1, 2, 3. All of them require support, and here's how I want you to imagine it. We have something called Wisconsin card sorter. It's just a problem-solving test, but I want you to imagine this.
What's it called?
It's called the Wisconsin card sorting. And it's a type of problem solving, and I like to use this for social stuff as well, because I like to understand it. Imagine you've got 4 cards, and they have shapes, a number of shapes, and varying colors. And you're supposed to lay them out in a pattern. Well, okay, so as you're doing it, let's say the first pattern is color. And you lay them out all yellow, and I say yes, yes, yes. And then eventually, I change my criterion. Now you need to be doing it by shape. And they do color again, and I say no. And they're like, oh gosh. And then they try number, no. And then they do it again. I can only say no.
You can only say yes or no.
You got to be clear that he's not telling the person that he's changing it on them.
I'm not. Yeah, it's a hidden rule.
How often does this
so,
happen?
Same thing with
so it's so imagine that's the way.
Not as often as you think.
Don't ever diagnose me.
No, but it's a super frustrating test.
It is.
Because it's testing executive functioning.
Oh, I did it. I was in neuropsych for a year, and I had a guy throw the cards at me in frustration once. But yeah, this guy knows. The idea is that's social stuff, right? I mean, social learning is I can see what feedback I'm getting, and I can make an amendment to that. I can adjust to it. With Asperger's, you can't fake. You can't fake it, really. I mean, there is social masking, which is kind of a different thing, and there is social cocooning. But the idea is, you don't just become not Aspie or not autistic. You're trying to figure out, is that right? And no one is saying yes or no. Mm-hmm. So you do need therapists, school personnel, sometimes your mentors, people at your school to be like, hey, by the way, this thing you did, ew, right? Sometimes, because you don't have the yes or no. I'm sure you had moments where faculty or something was like, hey, by the way.
Well, it's actually it's funny you mentioned that, because the faculty member I got along best with in my program after I graduated and I got diagnosed, approached me and was like, hey, should I get diagnosed? And I was like, yeah, check it out. And a month later, she came to me and was like, yep, so I'm autistic. I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense.
So this probably doesn't roll off as well with you guys because you actually do this, but people try to get me to diagnose them.
Oh, God.
Oh, nice.
And I'm like...
You should do it with your wand.
Make them float away.
You weren't, but you are now.
Usually what I do is I'll pull up WebMD, and and like really get it, and then
Oh,
we're like,
God.
oh wait, don't they tell you not to do this?
Oh my goodness.
Oh God, WebMD, diagnosing people with lupus and everything
Oh.
else.
I have stage 4 foot cancer at the moment. So,
Really?
yeah.
Me too.
There's
Oh my
like
God.
tests you can run too.
Man, I'd
Like
be
when somebody
dead in
walks
5
up to me and goes, oh, I X like Sheldon does, am I autistic? You know, but they do that with every character.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and that brings up a question for both for people on the spectrum and for people who diagnose. What's the difference between having this diagnosis and having a personality?
I think you actually raised the difference between, in the question at times, the difference between having a diagnosis and being quirky.
Yeah, no, being quirky and having autism, that's
The
the way.
reason I'm being hyper-literal about that is I took notes. And I
So
actually
many.
wrote down, 6 pages. Okay, 8, because there's pictures. I wrote down the literal definitions, and I'm going over with some of my material with my husband, who's just the sweetest neurotypical man ever. And like, he's like, yeah, okay, that's super encouraging. And then he stops, and I'm like, what? And he goes, that's like hyper literal. And I was like, but it's right. And there's a literal definition difference between the two.
Yes, and if we do want to split hairs, you can of course be quirky and have autism, but from the colloquial usage, this is actually how I think, by the way. From the colloquial perspective, people often they think of quirky as being not a diagnosis, and autism.
I think what you're looking for there is quirky is not necessarily bad.
There you go. Well, let's go with that. Let's go with
The
that.
diagnosis is bad.
Yeah, no, it's bad. But what do you think? How do you explain that to people, both from a personal perspective and from a professional perspective?
I would shed light a little bit. Whenever we have a diagnosis that becomes popular, let's say it wasn't diagnosed at all, and then all of a sudden starts to get diagnosed, and then there's positivity that comes to it, and then everybody wants to belong to it. We saw it with ADHD, we saw bipolar, we're seeing it with Aspie Nation. Aspie Nation, again, is very proud. This is a great thing, right? A lot of people see it as evolution, see it as a positive thing, even though it does absolutely come with limitations, necessarily so. But I don't know if you can speak this to me as well, but I got a lot of kids coming in with the hypothesis that they're Aspie or autistic, and I'm like, they're just cool. they're just a cool geek.
Yeah,
He's got anxiety.
The coolest. I had all the friends in high school.
Oh, I mean cool,
Tell me
like
what that's
actually
like.
cool, like likes
Sarcasm.
geeky things.
It's got that leather jacket.
You should know, as co-founder of Geeks Like Us, cool to me means geeky, so not popular.
Now it
Yeah.
does. Back
Right.
when we were kids. I'm probably back when I was a kid. You're old.
I don't even remember the question. Oh, quirky, that's right.
Yeah, quirky.
Being geeky was bad, right? Like
It's getting better.
now it's cool. Now we've got like how many conventions do we have at this point? How much?
All of them.
Yeah.
Everyone.
All the conventions all the time.
We're at this weird middle ground where it's like, yeah, I'm a gamer, yeah. And it's like, oh, that's great. What do you play? Madden. You're like,
Okay, no, don't be a gatekeeper.
I'm not a gatekeeper, but there is a difference between like being a gamer and someone who occasionally plays Madden. I mean, it's a fact. Welcome to the world of gaming. Please join us. But much like,
I
go
will
ahead.
totally argue with you about this.
What is that?
I'm gonna argue with you about this.
Different panel.
Okay, different band.
Different panel. Gatekeeping. Is it a thing? 1st and 10. I don't know. Madden reference. I know the sports ball.
I think the Eagles are a team in like most sports, so I can be like, oh, the Eagles, and people go, yeah.
All right. We should be running low on time at this point. What's that?
Hey,
Oh, stretch my. All right,
cool.
thank you. Okay, I was trying to be cognitive.
Hooray.
By the way, be nice to your enforcers. They make this happen.
Be
It's a
really
wonderful
nice
thing.
to them. I was around when they were tipsy once, and they told me like a lot of stuff that we do to them. Don't do it.
Be considerate of the enforcers.
Can you give examples?
No.
No.
That's up in the trust tree. We can't.
Just take that off.
So that's panel number 6.
So many ideas coming out of this. So, okay, then final question, and this is a sort of a synthesized question. What do you hope, what's one thing you hope everybody here takes away from this panel?
That I'm funny.
Can we check that box? Everybody just check that box.
I would probably say that, one, diagnosing this is not as easy as it looks. Media often gets it wrong and right on some levels. Producers are not your friends. And if you ever get involved in some sort of TV show or anything like that, be prepared to be attempted to be steamrolled by a producer, because that they want shock value.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Come see a clinical psychologist who actually has been trained in the ADOS by WPS, the people who...
What's the ADOS?
Yeah, there we go.
Autism Diagnostic Observation Scale. It's considered the gold standard of diagnosing autism. Anyone who diagnoses it off of, like, say, an SRS-2 or
What's
social responsiveness scale?
Yeah.
Go like
fancy
this and
test
they use
B.
terminology you don't get.
Right.
We're gonna go with just rating scales where I'm like, do I have this? Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have that? Doesn't sound like me. If someone's just giving you that and then diagnosing you with autism, you should probably sue them. Really quick, because that's not accurate.
Yeah, so
that's
important.
not how we do it.
Sure. If I would want you to leave with one thing is, look, all we are is people with strengths and weaknesses. That's all we are, different sets of strengths and weaknesses. Within Aspies, they have a unique profile. They have a lot of things that make them awesome and make them exceptional, as far as heightened intelligence, deductive reasoning. They might struggle to understand or identify feelings, but they're some of the sweetest, most compassionate people a lot of the times. It's not like they can't feel. That's an often misnomer, right?
Only some of them are. Some of them are mean.
What was that?
Some of us are mean.
Well, but that's the thing. You can be sweet and mean at the same time because you don't know what you're doing. You know, if you're mean, that's not Asperger's. That just means you're mean. If someone's like, "No, I understood what I was doing. I'm calling you a blah." It's like, yeah, you're now just kind of a jerk. Yeah, we'll not throw that into autism. But you know, the way I view it is this: there are a lot of us. You know, Temple Grandin, who we had worked with Max Gamer, has a quote that I love. It says, "If it wasn't for autism, we would have never gotten out of the caves." Right? And a lot of us do view autism actually as a form of evolution. If you think about all the strengths that come with it, it is becoming increasingly necessary for our increasingly technological, non-face-to-face world. And if you can, you know, again, Aspies tend to be awesome at using emojis, exclamation points, Twitter. They're like the best at it. And then some people are neurotypical suck at it, like me. I'm just quite awful at it.
Oh, emojis are great.
Oh, I'm so bad. So this is the way I want you to sort of think of it sometimes. If you've got the first sea creature starting to walk on land, every other sea creature is going to be like, "What are you doing? Get back in the water. You look ridiculous out there." And they're going to be struggling, right? It's new air. They don't know how to breathe. Everyone's telling them they're wrong. Their entire environment is incredibly hostile. You know, the fish in the water are making it increasingly so. But the idea is they're the ones who thrive. They're the superheroes. So let anyone who's autistic frame it in the way they want to, that they feel comfortable with. Don't make them think it's only strength-based. Don't make them think it's only disability. Whatever they want to grab onto that's positive. But just keep in mind, it is something that is exceptional and should be celebrated.
I was hoping that was going to be like a Pokemon reference as you were talking about.
Well, you've got a magic
then
card.
You just went evolution on us.
Card.
Like, oh, well,
Yeah,
thanks.
that's right.
I think more seriously, I mean I am funny, but more seriously, one of my favorite phrases is, if you've met one person on the autism spectrum, you've met one person on the autism spectrum, and I cannot tell you how true that is. And another thing I'd like you to remember is that media will portray a facet of a human that they want you to look at. And so anytime you see a character like this, like, there's a whole other set of information behind if that were a real person. So when you meet somebody who identifies as autistic, or for the love of God, shares that with you, and please be nice when they do, remember that that is not all of who they are, right? Like I mean, we're very different people, right? Like, and we're people, not robots.
I would.
Yeah, I like this one. Yeah. Yay, Shauna, what did you refer to yourself as? Sorry, Dr. B and Shauna, they are people who are very heroic, and in their life on a day-to-day and moments like these, step up and say, you know, this is something that I want to increase awareness, and I'm ASB, this is an identity I want to take so that I can help every other ASB. It's not required. No one's going to put that on them, but they're doing it. And so I like what you said. What did you call that? So you said autism advocate, or what did you call it?
Yeah, we were talking earlier because we're referencing meltdowns and whether we were. Dr. B was asking me if I was comfortable talking about it, and I am. So if you guys want to talk about what the difference between a meltdown and a tantrum is, and surprise, there is one. We can talk about it there. So we were talking about that, and I explained to these gentlemen that I consider myself an accessibility advocate. And so I'm willing to answer questions about, and like tell stories and, you know, share resources about that. But on the other side of things, I have a friend that if you ask her anything personal about herself, she will bolt in the opposite direction, and it takes us days to find her. So when you see somebody with a disability, if you walk up to them and you say, "What is wrong with you?" I want you to imagine me throat punching you. Because that's rude.
That is being
So
burned
rude.
into my mind.
I'm terrified now.
We're going to separate that violence from autism for a minute. That's Shauna.
Panel number 7.
So, what I hope you take away from this is, and this is gonna hop on what some of the other folks said, is that in media, story trumps fact. Media is narrative based, and if they think they're going to tell a good story, they will fudge or outright ignore facts. And you are getting, even when they do a great job of portraying a multidimensional character, you're still getting a fairly flat representation of humanity. And art in of itself is a hyper representation. So,
Are you? Do you know like the person who talks to CSI about their stuff?
No.
The psychologist. She's not licensed any longer.
oh god.
She doesn't practice. She doesn't do anything. She still works with them, but she let her license lapse. She didn't get it taken away. Let me be very clear.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, that's good. All right.
No, she didn't get it taken away.
She gets paid better this way.
She gets paid way better to do it.
Yeah.
She has very important, according to her, opinions. But she also then just looks at the DSM, fact checks it real quick, and says it's okay to go.
And gets paid for that. Oh man, that's a sweet gig. So it looks like we are about done with time. Look, I can read some social cues, like the pacing back and forth and like holding up.
Thank you, enforcers.
I
That
know,
was so
but he's
cool of
right
you guys.
for it. But anyway,
That was so cool of you guys.
Make sure to follow all of these wonderful people on the tweets, and make sure to follow.
I just post pictures of my dog.
Well, that wins the internet. We've seen this. And make sure to follow Take This. And have a great rest of PAX, folks.
Thanks so much,
Thank
guys.
you,
this
everybody.
was such a fun panel to have you guys come with us. We'll hang out outside here for a little bit. So if you guys want to have any questions.